The International Olympic Committee bans Team Russia from the 2018 Winter Games after a 2-year doping scandal. That's despite a lack of concrete evidence to support the claims of a state-sponsored drug program.
These invited athletes will participate, be it in individual or team competitions, under the name Olympic Athlete from Russia.
In other news, the recent deadly terror attacks in the UK could have been thwarted by security services, according to a new report for the government. And the US president is expected to recognize Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel, a move likely to ignite fury among many in the Middle East. Hello from me and the team here at RTHQ in Moscow. It's Wednesday afternoon at 4 here in the Russian capital. Our top story this hour: the International Olympic Committee has banned Team Russia from the 2018 Winter Games in South Korea. The decision was made on Tuesday night. However, individual athletes who can prove that they're clean will be allowed to compete under a neutral flag.
These invited athletes will participate, be it in individual or team competitions, under the name Olympic Athlete from Russia. They will compete with the uniform bearing this name and under the Olympic flag. The Olympic anthem will be played in any ceremony.
No one thought about what it actually means for the athletes to go to the Olympics under a neutral flag.
It's simply the murder of our national sport.
Russian athletes won't give up on their country or their flag, as this is always in their hearts.
The decision to ban Russian athletes follows the results of 2 special commissions launched to investigate alleged doping in Russian sport. RT's Kate Partridge and Noonan O'Neill earlier discussed how it all unfolded.
Basically, what it amounted to, as we heard there, Thomas Bach, the president of the IOC, effectively banned Russia from the Winter Olympics, which start on the 9th of February. And that doesn't give them a great deal of time, the athletes, then to appeal against those decisions. There have been 22 athletes have already appealed. 25 were banned in the build-up to this decision. 22 are now appealing. And as I say, not a great deal of time either to appeal or to prove whether or not you're innocent and be able to take part.
What the IOC, Kate, saw was the great compromise was athletes being able to compete under a neutral flag. But there's a number of issues surrounding it. Isn't there time constraints that you just said? And also the prestige of actual competing for your country, that will be taken away from them.
Absolutely. As they said, it's now an OAR, aren't you? If you're to take part, you're an Olympic athlete from Russia. As we heard, no anthems, no flags. And also, as you said, that sense of prestige, that sense of patriotism, the whole point of what the Olympics is about. These are all claims. Effectively, it's claim and counterclaim, because you had Rodchenkov and McLaren saying this is how they did it. Then you've got Schmidt saying, yes, we believe this is how you can do it as well. You can replicate this. But we don't see any photos. We haven't seen any cameras. They haven't filmed it, from what we've seen, to say, OK, yeah, this is the claim, we can prove it, and we're going to show how to do it. It all starts with Grigory Rodchenkov, who was the head of Moscow's, the anti-doping lab there, and he turned whistleblower by effectively saying and claiming that there'd been systemic doping, that it was state-sponsored, and this had been going back effectively before the Sochi Winter Olympics. And he described a system he claimed was where effectively the Russians had managed to override a tamper-proof system. So in other words, there was a way that you could get into your samples and you could effectively affect those samples, get into those bottles, also swap them. Also, there was a means of being able to hide and cover up all your traces of doing this. And of course, this was absolutely explosive. And on the back of that, that's why they had some of the Russian team, the Russian track and field team in particular, was suspended from the Rio Games while this was being investigated. The McLaren report came out, which everybody's heard about now for so many years, effectively said, yes, the state-sponsored doping, this is how they did it, and explained the elaborate system of how the Russians had allegedly managed to get into these tamper-proof bottles. And on the back of that, the IOC is saying, well, OK, you're making these claims. What we now want to do is we want to go in and have our own investigation. So we had the Schmidt report come through, which was then effectively trying to find a way to replicate what they claim was the means of getting into those bottles and also changing the system. And what they saw were by scratches on bottles, effectively proving what they thought was how you could get into the samples. Also, they said there were elevated salt levels that meant that these samples weren't true reflections. And basically, all of this evidence that they put forward, backing up Rodchenkov and McLaren, is on the basis for now these decisions. And this has caused a bit of consternation amongst the athletes themselves.
Sure.
I mean, one biathlete has said, well, if you're going to basically ban people on the basis of scratches and some elevated salt, then I'm really worried, and we can hear from him now.
I hope that we will be able to see some evidence for what they're being punished, and that it's not that there are some marks on the bottles, because then I will be terribly afraid of giving samples.
Well, it's not only fear of the giving samples, there's also been some other sort of worries that have been raised by athletes and also across the organisation as well, by saying that this is sort of double standards here. Because effectively, you've got a blanket ban for one country, but looking over time as well, we've known of athletes who have been banned, Tyson Gay, Justin Gatlin, and they have been banged to rights. They were proved, there wasn't a presumption of guilt there, they were actually proved to be guilty and banned and come back.
And that's what Russian athletes will be looking at now, what we're seeing on our screen. Justin Gatlin, who came back to win a silver medal after being he was banned twice before this. Russian athletes have never doped. The majority of them proven that as well. But now they're looking at a lifetime ban on Olympic sports.
But this is all because of the system or the level that the IOC demand in terms of making their judgments. And this is based on a presumption of guilt, given what they consider to be all the different factors taken into account. Not direct evidence, but all those different layers. So what they're saying is that by being able to replicate, they think, the system of being able to override a tamper-proof system. By Rodchenkov's diaries, that is, say, he wrote about all the things that were going on at the time. By the medal table, the people who won medals. By the so-called Duchess list of all the people who are meant to be taking drugs. They said by taking all these into account, it's a presumption of guilt. But as we were looking back over the past few days, as I was covering before, this is a presumption of guilt that covers everybody, and therefore it's a blanket decision. But they're going to be loopholes, as we were talking about before. 4 years ago, there was scepticism that Russia's first Winter Olympics would go without a hitch. Doommongers predicted not enough flights, not enough hotels, and not enough snow.
New concerns about Sochi.
Squalor in Sochi.
Double toilets and missing door handles.
The water that came out of the tap.
Problem with the door.
But the host games went so well, even critics had to admit they were a hit.
Everything's been amazing. It's running like clockwork, and everything's just going really, really well.
I've been really impressed with everything Russia's done so far.
Seeing how much they care about the security has been really nice.
So far, it's well organized, and people are really friendly here and having a good time.
Pretty sweet, like our accommodation, our food.
Almost 4 years later, and Russians who triumphed in Sochi are now being stripped of their medals and given life Olympic bans. Why? In 2016, the McLaren report explosively claimed Russia used an elaborate system of state-sponsored doping. Athletes, officials and ministers were implicated, like the plot of a Cold War novel. The attitude to Russia returned to scepticism, then retribution, as its track and field team and entire Paralympic team were banned from the Rio Games, which left the clean athletes wondering why.
We cannot have the Russians competing again until they have adopted the right policies that show that they are a clean nation. Never mind clean athletes, they have to be a clean nation.
The IOC and IPC have now definitively backed up McLaren, supporting the claims of former lab boss Grigory Rodchenkov, who's under criminal investigation in Russia, and saying that infamous sample swapping system has finally been replicated. But questions remain. The IOC standard of proof is not beyond any reasonable doubt, but rather the balance of probability. The presumption of guilt is enough.
It was Rodchenkov who was the original and only source of so-called proof against Russian athletes. This evidence has been grossly overvalued. We can't say we are seeing the result of a proper legal process. It's a question of faith. To believe Rodchenkov or not, it looks more like a religious inquisition.
Where sample bottles had no visible scratches, they were presumed tampered with, as the Russians must have perfected their technique and left no marks. The no-argument basis for an en masse ban. The clean condemned without any guilt. No presumption of innocence for Team Russia.
What we see here is actually a violation of the Olympic Charter.
which stands against political, national, racial discrimination. So it appears that in the name of protecting clean athletes, they are actually taking away the rights of Russian clean athletes. And in my opinion, the McLaren accusations are unfounded and they're very politically biased.
Surely any athlete should be denied a medal and banned from competition if he or she cheats. It undermines others' lifetime's work, as does a ban slapped on the innocent who are simply presumed guilty.
Despite some headlines saying the IOC decision wasn't harsh enough, a number of international athletes have been expressing sympathy on Twitter, many pointing out that the scandal's become a political symbol and that the move likely ignores punishment for those who have actually doped.
What a sad and complicated situation. I feel sick for the clean affected athletes and fully sympathize with whatever emotions they may feel.
This decision by the IOC is just a political symbol, but really does nothing to punish the actual cheaters. There are still a large number of dirty athletes competing. This just opens the door for them to continue through the Olympics.
It's a victory that only officially cleared and clean athletes will be able to compete in Pyeongchang. But it's so sad that Russian athletes won't be able to compete under the flag of the country that raised them.
The International Olympic Committee itself says it's unclear who is behind the doping efforts. The IOC's report also mentions it was unable to find evidence to suggest that the Russian government was responsible outside of the sports ministry.
Nevertheless, the independent and impartial evidence do not allow the IOC-DC to establish with certitude either who initiated or who headed this scheme. On many occasions, reference was made on the involvement at the Minister of Sports level, but no indication, independent or impartial evidence appeared to corroborate any involvement or knowledge at a higher level of the state.
Radio Sports host Alan Moore from Moscow's Capital FM believes the IOC has found a profitable strategy in demonizing Russia.
It's sport, and that's simply it. There is no fair play in sport. I mean, at this level, the simple truth is that in order to compete at the highest level, you have to do something to stay there. And when you have a very well-paying job at the level of Mr. Bach and Mr. Reedy and Travis Tigert and so on, they need to do what they can to stay on top. And that's what they're doing. And Russia is very useful to keep this. It's very, very unfair in Russia. And they're doing this. There is, of course, a political drive behind it. The one little thing question that I have in my mind is, OK, so Russia's banned and so on. If Russia was completely banned, what next? Who else will they go after? Like, my money would be on nobody, because they will want to keep beating Russia, keep beating the drum to say Russia's bad, because if Russia's the only bad one, then all the other athletes are clean. And then there's my athletes from Ireland are clean, your athletes from the UK are clean. So we can sleep well at night thinking, oh, we're okay, the Russians are the bad guys. In the case, you know, an awful lot of cases that there's a lot of bad guys everywhere. And, you know, it's just, it won't change. And now with this, it won't change even further.
The World Anti-Doping Agency had laid out a roadmap for Russia to become compliant after the allegations, with Moscow taking unprecedented measures to help counter any possible doping among Russian athletes. The structure of Russia's own anti-drugs agency, RUSADA, was reformed, allowing international experts to take control of its tests. Doping's also been made a criminal offence, punishable with a jail sentence, a law only currently imposed by a handful of European countries. RUSADA met 18 out of the 20 criteria, saying it couldn't meet the final two because it denies any government-run doping program ever existed. But last month, WADA still found the Russian agency to be non-compliant. The head of WADA denied the decision was political, but did say sport cannot exist without politics.
It's a sort of impossible dream, isn't it? Because politics affects every aspect of your life, and sport is such an important part of people's lives.
Well, such comments may be at odds with perhaps the most important document in sport, the Olympic Charter. It clearly states that there can be no political or commercial abuse of sport and the athletes. And the International Olympic Committee president gave his assurance that the decision was not politically motivated.
The IOC is politically absolutely neutral. We would not allow to be influenced by any kind of political considerations in such sporting matters.
Just listening to the press conference, and they fielded exactly that question, and they said this isn't a political decision. But of course the world knows that it's exactly that. This has been a controversy that has been clouded in political judgment, and it's impossible to separate this particular decision from what's going on in the rest of the world regarding fake news and the alleged intervention of Russia into Britain's Brexit vote and even the American presidential elections. So there is a lot of this kind of stuff swirling around the world at the moment. A lot of it is beyond belief, frankly, but people are accepting some of it. So I don't think you can disentangle the two things.
More RT headline news ahead. British security services missed opportunities to avert recent terror attacks. That's according to a new report, and it's among our stories after the break.
Here's what people have been saying about Redacted tonight.
Give it to us.
Redacted is full-on awesome.
Really?
The only show I go out of my way to watch every week. It really packs a punch. Lee Camp is the John Oliver of RT America.
You do have the same accent.
Hey, we are apparently better than boobs.
Nothing's better than boobs.
You see, people you've never heard of love Redacted tonight. The president of the World Bank, though, hates it.
Yeah, he doesn't really have any taste.
Seriously, he sent us an email.
I've played for many clubs over the years, so I know the game inside out. Football isn't only about what happens on the pitch or the final score. It's about the passion from the fans. It's the age of the super manager, billionaire owners, and spending 220 million on one player. But it's an experience like nothing else on earth. And because I want to share what I think and what I know about the beautiful game, I agreed to one more transfer. And this is my new team.
Welcome back. In Britain, opportunities to prevent a series of recent terror attacks in both Manchester and London were missed, according to a new report carried out for the government. With the details, here's Polly Boyker.
Well, this has come from an independent report that was carried out by the UK Home Office, and it was looking at how well the security services did their jobs in the run-up to the string of terror attacks that took place in the UK over the past year. And one of the things that it found was that 3 of the 6 attackers that they were looking at, they were on MI5's radar. So the domestic security services were watching them already. Perhaps more worryingly, the report concluded that the attack carried out by Salman Abedi in Manchester Arena in May, that's the one that took the lives of 23 people, among them many children, it says that with hindsight, that attack could have been preventable had the cards fallen differently. That's an actual quote from the report. Take a look at how the cards did end up falling. Well, to give you an idea of the extent to which the perpetrator of the attack in Manchester was on the security services radar, well, MI5 were meant to have a meeting about whether or not to up his surveillance 9 days after he was able to carry out that bombing. The report also says that MI5 denies that the bombing was preventable, and all this has coincided with a rather dramatic story here about 2 men who have been arrested for plotting to bomb Downing Street and assassinate Theresa May. So that gives you an illustration of the sort of constant threat that the security services here are having to deal with. Take a listen to the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, commenting on this report.
Plots are developing more quickly from radicalisation to attack, and threats are becoming harder to detect.
Although it's got to be said that a foiled plot is clearly better than one that has been carried out. But in the run-up to Christmas, this severe threat level is going to be weighing heavily on many people's minds.
The other big development this Wednesday, a senior U.S. official has confirmed that the U.S. is going to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The decision by President Trump has already sparked a wave of criticism across the Muslim and Arab world. Trump's also set to kickstart the process of moving the American embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv.
Ultimately, he'll make what he feels is the best decision for the United States.
A way must be found through negotiations to resolve the status of Jerusalem as the future capital of both states, so that the aspiration of both parties can be fulfilled.
This is a decision that makes it more important than ever that the long-awaited American proposals on the Middle East peace process are now brought forward, and I would say that should happen as a matter of priority.
Jerusalem, which is considered holy by Muslims, Jews and Christians, is not recognized as the Israeli capital by most of the international community. That's despite the country's government being based there and it claiming the ancient city as its capital. Here's Caleb Mopin.
Donald Trump is once again at the center of controversy. He is now talking about moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. President of the Palestinian Authority has already denounced the move, saying that it could have dangerous consequences for the peace process. We've also heard from Hamas, which has talked about the possibility that they would revive the Intifada.
We call on all our people in Israel and around the world to gather in city centers and Israeli embassies and consulates with the aim of demonstrating our general popular anger.
Long-standing U.S. allies in the region, such as Turkey and Saudi Arabia, have also criticized the move. Turkey has even talked about the possibility of cutting off diplomatic ties with Israel.
We'd like to warn America once more not to take this step, which might deepen problems in the region. We will keep up our fight against this decision to the end. This situation could take us to the point where we could end diplomatic relations with Israel.
The U.S. State Department has sent out a cable warning people at American embassies around the country about the need for heightened security. Furthermore, we've also heard that the U.S. consulate that is already in Jerusalem is at this point warning U.S. citizens living in the city. This seems like a dramatic move, and it seems to fly in the face of an earlier statement that we heard from Donald Trump. Let's take a listen to what he said.
So I'm looking at two-state and one-state. And I like the one that both parties like. I'm very happy with the one that both parties like.
One party, the Palestinians and their allies, is already deeply offended, and there's possibility of retaliation. And if that retaliation materializes, then the other party could also be suffering. It seems that there's indeed many people that are far from happy with this decision from the White House. Caleb Mopin, RT, New York.
Protests over the impending official announcement, during about 5 hours now, have already started in Palestinian territories. Several men in Bethlehem burned pictures of the American leader. And Trump said in the past that he believes he has a good shot at bringing peace to the region. But journalist Mark Brzezinski told us he doesn't think that's really on the president's agenda.
The bigger picture is not a peace process. That doesn't even really exist. Nobody really expects that to happen. What's really happening is the region is being flooded with arms. Trump laughs when he talks about the tens of billions that we're selling around the world, not only in the Middle East, but now in Asia. Let's not take Trump at his word. This is a tremendous mistake, and it's even a waste of time. The real policies are Trump needs to keep himself in office and needs to pretend that he's president and that different constituencies should not oppose him.
Okay, that's your RT News Wrap for now. Get hold of the RT apps and get news alerts 24/7. That's it from me. I'll be back in about half an hour to update you again. See you then.